next rule is fragments. Grammar Rule 12, fragments. This is on page 87 of the writing manual. What is a fragment? Well, it is defined right here up at the top of the page. Let's go ahead and highlight that or underline it. A fragment is a group of words that doesn't complete a thought, doesn't have an independent clause, or doesn't have a main verb. Remember that if you want to compose a complete thought, if you want to make a sentence, what you need is an independent clause, and didn't mean to cross that off, actually, I meant to underline that. What you need is an independent clause, and that independent clause will contain what is known as a main verb. When I say something like, the boy jumped, this jumped is serving as my main verb. This group of words is an independent clause. Now, if I were to change that to, although the boy jumped, now what I have done is I have put this jumped, which was my main verb, into a dependent clause. By throwing this although at the beginning of this independent clause, I have now created a dependent clause. If I put a period after this dependent clause and move on to my next sentence, what I have done is I have created a fragment. I have created a group of words that doesn't complete a thought. I have created a group of words that has a verb in it, but that verb cannot be my main verb because it is not part of an independent clause. If I said something like, the boy jumping on the bed, period. Again, it looks like I have a verb right here, but this verb cannot function as a main verb because it's actually not a verb at all. It's actually an adjective describing boy. When I see an ing word, that word, it could be one of a couple of things. One of the things it can be is an adjective. It could be part of a verb phrase if I have a to be verb in front of it, and then I would have a main verb. The boy was jumping on the bed. That would complete a thought. But without the was in front of the jumping, I do not have a complete thought. All I have is a noun and then a little bit of description of the noun. I have the noun, the boy, and description of the noun. So again, I need to make sure that when I form sentences, when I throw a period down on the paper, I need to make sure that what comes before completes a thought. In example 1, might want to press pause on the video and determine if example 1 completes a thought. If it does, move on. If it doesn't, you got to correct it. So in example 1, we have the planets of the solar system revolving around the sun, a yellow dwarf. We have the same scenario that I just described above. We have this ing verb, which, like I said, is not a verb at all. It is describing the planets of the solar system, so it is an adjective. So that can't be our main verb, and if we look elsewhere for a verb, we don't see a main verb. So this is a fragment. This group of words does not express a complete thought. It is really just a phrase that revolves around this noun, the planets of the solar system revolving around the sun, a yellow dwarf. All we have is a series of phrases here. So what we need to do is we need to create a main verb. We need to create an independent clause, and the way that we can do that is by changing revolving to the main verb revolve. And now we have the planets revolve around the sun. That is a complete thought. Here are your 3 tip-off clues for fragments. The first one is what we have just spoken about a couple of times, ing words. Remember that ing words cannot be main verbs unless preceded by a form of to be. And that's what I talked about up here. If I put a was before this jump, excuse me, was or had been or will be or has been. If I put any of these forms of to be in before this jumping, then the jumping is part of the sentence's main verb. But without a to be verb before an ing word, I have to be very careful to look for and find a main verb elsewhere in the sentence, because that ing word cannot be my main verb. So in example 2, press pause if you want to do it on your own. The way that we would change, example 2 is a fragment. All we have here is the author combining intimate personal details, skillfully weaving a portrait. We just have a string of description after this noun at the beginning of the sentence. This combining describes the author. This skillfully weaving describes the author. So again, we don't have a main verb here. We don't have an independent clause. What we could do to make this a complete thought is we can just change this combining to combines. We could say combines, combined, has combined. There are any number of tenses that we can put this verb combines in, but we need to get rid of that ing and make a main verb out of it. The author combines intimate personal details with momentous historical events, skillfully weaving a portrait. Some students do note that you can change this weaving to a main verb as well. The author, combining intimate personal details, skillfully weaves a portrait. You can do that, but the portion of the sentence that is underlined is here at the beginning, and so that's where we should make our change in this case. The second tip-off clue here is who, which, that clauses. For those of you that have been reviewing the manual conscientiously and consistently, you might remember that these are the relative pronouns, and what they form are relative dependent clauses. They form dependent clauses, not independent clauses. So if you see a verb inside a who, which, that clause, like this allows, is, you need to know that that verb is part of a dependent clause. In other words, it cannot be your main verb because it's not part of an independent clause. So in example 3, if you want to go ahead and correct it on your own, press pause and then rejoin us. In example 3, we have the new technology which allows television manufacturers to make sets that are only several millimeters deep. So all we have here is this noun, and then we follow that up with this which clause, which is just describing that noun. So that which clause in effect, that dependent clause in effect, is just adjective. It's just adding description to the new technology. In other words, we just have noun and adjective. We do not have a main clause. I'm sorry, we do not have an independent clause or a main verb here. The way that we can create a main verb is by taking that allows out of the relative dependent clause and just saying or writing the new technology allows television manufacturers to make sets that are only several millimeters deep. And now we have an independent clause, we have a complete thought, we no longer have a fragment. The last tip-off clue for fragments is going to be appositives. And if you've been reviewing the manual, again, you might remember that on the SAT, most of the time these guys are a phrase between commas. There is a more technical definition of appositives, which you can go back to your subject-verb agreement section and review. But if you see a phrase between commas, you've got to remember that that phrase between commas might be an appositive, and all appositives do is add description. Again, they act as adjectives, describers. So in example 4, press pause if you want to do it on your own. Example 4, we have Tin Pan Alley, comma, the name given to the collection of music publishers and songwriters who dominated the United States popular music in the late 19th century, period. All we have here is Tin Pan Alley, which is a noun at the beginning of this group of words, and then we have a comma, and then we have this phrase which is in a positive. What it is it's a noun phrase revolving around this noun, the name. So that's a noun phrase that is just describing what Tin Pan Alley is. What is Tin Pan Alley? It is the name given to blah, blah, blah. So we just have a noun followed by a positive or noun phrase. In other words, we do not have an independent clause. We have a dependent clause snuggled inside this noun phrase, this appositive, but we don't have a verb that can be our main verb. Remember, this verb dominated is part of this relative dependent clause, so it cannot be our main verb. The way that we would create a main verb here is by inserting one right in here. We can just insert was between Tin Pan Alley and the name. Tin Pan Alley was the name given to blah, blah, blah. And now we have a main verb. That is pretty much it for fragments. Really, you just need to know what a fragment is. You need to know what the tip-off clues are. You need to know how to fix a fragment. Usually it involves either getting rid of the tip-off clue, changing the tip-off clue. Here we got rid of the tip-off clue. Here we changed the tip-off clue. Or just inserting a main verb at some point in the sentence. That is all for fragments.